Northern Cameroon is characterized by flat to gently undulating countryside, with vast plains and occasional rocky outcrops that stretch over a mix of dry and wet savannah landscapes. Large ephemeral rivers create seasonal wetlands and floodplains important for agriculture and wildlife. The northernmost parts of this region are a part of the Sahel, which marks a transition between the desert and the more fertile savanna to the south. The region falls within the Sudano-Sahelian climatic zone, which experiences distinct wet and dry seasons. There are 3 vegetation regimes. Grasslands are dominated by grasses, which grow tall during the rainy season and dry up in the long dry periods. Sparse trees and shrubs, including scattered acacia trees and other drought-resistant species, are adapted to prolonged dry spells and are vital for wildlife and local communities. And gallery forests, which follow watercourses forming fingers of green that stretch into the grasslands. The region supports a wide array of biodiversity, highly dependent on seasonal rainfall for its ecological health. This unique ecosystem is, however, under severe pressure.
Je suis Serge Patrick Tadjo, je suis le conservateur du parc national de Bubanjida.
The Bubanjida National Park and the 7 surrounding hunting zones constitute the Bubanjida Operational Technical Unit. This unit covers approximately 750,000 hectares, with 220,000 hectares making up the park's core protection area and 530,000 hectares covering the hunting zones. We cooperate with the different hunting zones around us, particularly the 4 hunting zones operated by Mayo Oldiri safaris.
So here in North Cameroon, Mayo Oldiri has 4 different hunting concessions. Mayo Oldiri, Mayo Ndwell, Vayimba and Jibao. Our smallest area is about 65,000 hectares and the biggest is just under 90,000 hectares. So we've got quite a lot of terrain here. The concession system here is unlike other parts of Africa. Typically, when an area becomes available, you approach the game department and you pay a set lease fee per hectare, kind of like you would a grazing fee in southern Africa. That concession will then be yours, the hunting company, until such time you want to move on, or unless you create a major issue with the government. But typically once you get an area here, as long as you pay your annual taxes and fees, you've got the area as long as you want it. In addition to the concession fee, you would obviously pay your optional quota. So as and when you shoot your quota, you would pay the government their set trophy fees for those animals.
The work Bubanjida National Park is involved in is divided into 5 sections. The Anti-poaching Unit, which oversees the security. The Ecological Monitoring Unit, which focuses on wildlife research. We have a unit that specializes in dealing with developmental projects with communities living on the periphery, developing income-generating activities and alternatives to the unsustainable exploitation of natural resources. We also have an administration unit that manages all infrastructure and administration within the park. Finally, we have a cross-border management unit collaborating with neighboring Chad. Financial support is needed for the management of the protected area. The WCS, known as the Wildlife Conservation Society, works with us daily to support our ground operations.
So when I started off here, all of the areas were teeming with game. This camp, for example, we're at right now, you could actually do your entire safari just from walking from the camp. There were eland, buffalo, big herds of elephant. There was absolutely everything. And there was some poaching, some meat poaching, but it didn't seem to impact the numbers much at all. We did run a few anti-poaching units, but poaching was minimal. But as time went on, getting into sort of 2014, 15, I started to notice some species were starting to decline, mainly your reed buck, hartebeest, bushbuck. And then the methods of poaching also changed. Initially it was solely snares, cable snares to catch animals around their feet. They dig a hole and attach the snare to a log, and then they follow the dragged log and spear the animal to death. They started using torches, hunting at night with cheap Chinese torches, and using homemade shotguns. and that's why the reedbuck population started to plummet. And then as we got towards 2018, 19, when COVID hit, that was the very worst. The poaching just increased and increased. You'd be out hunting and you'd hear gunshots 2 times, 3 times a day in some of the areas.
We are faced with 2 types of poaching. There's the small-scale poaching by the local people, and then the large-scale poaching of elephants and carnivores by people coming from neighboring areas. A safari company's task can be a bit challenging because they must ensure the protection of the area, but they have no weapons. They don't have adequately constituted anti-poaching teams, so we, as the Conservation Service, must provide substantial support with all the state equipment.
They don't have guys that are armed like us. They don't have eco guards that are well trained or military support. Generally, each month we send a group of 3 military guys and an eco guard, and that's going to work in collaboration with the guys from the hunting zones to help try and end the difficulties they have in the field. We patrol for 10 days, 15 days. It just depends on the information we have. The main difficulties we have is in terms of the logistics, and we don't have a good number of eco guards that can help us because we are short, so sometimes we are just forced to work with what we have.
Nomadic pastoralists, people who move seasonally with their livestock in search of pasture and water, have been marginalized and ostracized by more sedentary populations for centuries. This phenomenon can be attributed to various social, economic, environmental, and political factors. Nomadic pastoralists require large tracts of land, which they view as a communal resource to be shared, to move with their herds. This brings them into contact with settled agricultural communities who view them as trespassers, leading to conflicts over grazing areas and water resources. The Mbororo people, a nomadic cattle herding group, are an offshoot of the Fulani tribe from Nigeria that drifted into the borderlands of Cameroon and neighboring areas of the Central African Republic, Chad, and the Democratic Republic of Congo in the 1980s. There are an estimated 1 million Mbororo, and their movements across the region significantly impact wildlife conservation, particularly in and around protected areas. The Mbororo's large herds of cattle require extensive grazing land, which can lead to overgrazing in areas that are also crucial habitats for wildlife. Overgrazing depletes vegetation, reduces biodiversity, and can lead to soil erosion, ultimately degrading the environment. As available grazing land becomes scarce due to population pressure and environmental changes, the Mbororo often move their cattle into protected areas. This encroachment disrupts wildlife habitats, interferes with conservation efforts, and can lead to conflicts with park authorities. Wildlife, particularly predators like lions and hyenas, often prey on Mbororo cattle. In retaliation, herders may poison or kill these predators, leading to a decline in their populations. This direct conflict between livestock protection and wildlife conservation is a significant challenge.
The main cattle problems we have are with the nomadic tribes that are around here. But these guys will move with their cattle through 3-4 different countries where we are. Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon, the CAR. And they could be on this concession for a month now. 2 months from now, they're 300 kilometers away with their cattle and goats and what have you. And then a month later, they're over the border into CAR. So they move freely. They don't have passports. They're a law unto themselves. And often when cattle come into the area and we go to react to the issue, we catch them and these guys are from Nigeria or they're from deep inside Chad. They know that they're not allowed to come into the hunting zones, but they'll come in anyway. A lot of your animals, especially the eland, as soon as there's disturbance from domestic livestock, they move. They will not stay in the same area as cattle, and that's a big concern for us. So it's not like we have a problem with the local communities on our doorstep. These are people that move all over this region. So it's not just about them grazing cattle. They'll chop down a huge 300-400-year-old mahogany tree, to get a couple of cups of honey. They'll poison pools of water in the river to get all the fish. The birds come and drink, they get poisoned and so on. And they poach, and they cause a hell of a lot of disturbance. It's not just about the cattle. Yeah. They piss off the locals quite a bit as well, because their cattle get into their crops in the rainy season. That's how that one tracker of mine got beaten up and all the rest, because he went and gave these guys hell. Their cattle got into his crops and they flipped and smashed his arms, and so yeah, they don't like each other. Although these nomads have been living that lifestyle for centuries, the world has changed. The populations in Africa now, compared to even 10 years ago, have increased so much that that way of life can't continue. You can't have families moving around with 500, 600 head of cattle. There's not enough land, there's not enough grass to do that. 50 years ago, they moved with their cattle and barely what they could carry to eat, a bit of corn and maize and so on. Nowadays, they own motorbikes, they've got cell phones, they have medicines, they inoculate their cattle so that a lot of them are not even dying of sleeping sickness. So a lot more cattle are surviving, a lot more of the people are surviving. So on one hand, they're enjoying the benefits of modern day society, but are still living in the past, and that can't continue to work. If you look at a map and look at the conservation areas or the hunting blocks, it's a pinprick on the map. So at all costs, these areas need to be looked after. When we first started hunting here, the poaching wasn't a huge threat to us then. We would still employ game scouts, which basically patrolled the areas unarmed. They would only carry machetes and axes, typically groups of 6 to 8 game scouts in a team. And they would fall under the supervision of the PH that was hunting in that area. That was adequate at that time. But as the poaching increased, it became clear that we would need to increase the numbers of our scouts. And not only that, because the poachers now were more and more armed, we had to start employing military to accompany our game scouts, because you can't expect game scouts who are carrying machetes to arrest gangs of armed poachers. So we've now started hiring military personnel to accompany our game scouts. There's pretty much no industry in Northern Cameroon, so getting work is extremely difficult. The main cash crop here in the north is cotton, and people raise some livestock, but that's about it. And the population just keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. You'll drive through the villages and there's just people sitting around under trees. And I think the increase in population is also the main reason why the poaching has increased. In each concession, the area most affected in that concession is always the area that's closest to the villages. Even though the villages may be 20 or 30 kilometers away, people have nothing to do, they're going to walk that distance. And in some places they can even access close to the concession by road using these cheap Chinese motorcycles. They get dropped off, they'll poach. When they have enough meat, with cell phones nowadays, they make a call, the meat gets picked up, it gets moved out. So we'll deploy scouts in the most threatened areas. Patrols are typically 5 days to a week long with military personnel. The military gets changed every sort of week or so. So every week the position of the scouting is changed. So typically the poachers will shoot an animal, skin it, cut the meat up, carry the meat back to their base camp, and then there they will rack it. They'll build meat racks where they'll build fires underneath and they smoke the meat. That way it's cured and it's also way lighter to carry, and there's not blood and stuff like that everywhere. So when they have enough dried meat, that's when they'll normally ship it back to the villages or wherever they're going to sell that meat. It's rare that they'll poach and carry out fresh meat. It does happen, especially the concessions that are near a main road. That does happen, but mainly it's drying the meat first. In this concession in particular, we have a public road that runs almost through the center of the area. That is a huge weak point for us. It's very easy for poachers to come in and carry meat out, and there's no one to control the movement on that road, so it's very easy access for the poachers. The main market for the poached meat is the villages and the bigger towns. We've caught poachers here that are from Nbororo, which is about 150 kilometers from here. It's a big town. It's probably the second biggest town in the north of Cameroon. So that meat will find its way there by motorcycle and be sold on the markets there. So initially, our communication here was solely satellite phones. There was nothing else. I've never seen a landline in this country, and there were no cell phones in the capital, some of the big cities. But out here, I don't think we had cell phone service until about 2014. If I'm correct, I think that was about the first time there was limited cell phone service. Now, there's pretty good coverage in most of the areas, and that also worked in the favor of poachers. You know, they could call in transport to pick up meat, get information, even possibly from people that work in the hunting areas. So that created another problem for us. So when COVID hit us, we were actually at the end of our season that year, and obviously the whole world shut down, including Cameroon. The future was very uncertain at that point. The poaching was rife, and obviously now our entire forest season was cancelled. There was no income, so we had to decrease our numbers of anti-poaching personnel. And I think the very worst 2 years of poaching that we ever had was from the start of COVID going 2 years in. Obviously, as soon as the hunts were able to resume, we re-employed more scouts again and management for that.
Votre position, parlez.
Our second biggest issue here, apart from the poaching, is encroachment by the nomad cattle herders that move with huge numbers of cattle freely between the Central African Republic, Nigeria, Chad and Cameroon, even going into the Congo. And this is a nomadic tribe that move with big herds of cattle, sheep, goats. Back in countries like Zimbabwe, we have a campfire system where the community benefit directly from the hunting area. Those are communal areas. They're not set aside safari concessions as such as these are. So I don't think that model would really work here because firstly, we don't have elephant anymore to hunt, which is the main meat source in those campfire projects, and we don't shoot the volume of buffalo either that would support such a program. So I don't think the campfire system would work here in Cameroon. So when I first came to this camp in 2002, we had a manager here called Sadi. He was born in Garoua. He was half Lebanese, half French. His parents had a trading store in Garoua. And he told me as a kid, his dad would walk from their house in Garoua and go and shoot roan and buffalo for meat and carry it back to the house. That's how much game there was. Now, you would have to drive at least 7 hours from Garoua before you would even see a rabbit. There's absolutely nothing, it's desert. So there's various methods of poaching here. The most common are the cable snares, which are made from motorbike clutch or brake cables. They dig a hole and attach that a noose and cable to a log so that when the animal steps down into it, it tightens around the leg and then drags a heavy log. The poacher will then come and follow that drag and then spear or machete that animal to death. Another method which is extremely damaging is the use of homemade shotguns, mainly hunting at night. A lot of animals are wounded and a lot of animals are killed. And then we also have fish poaching as well, where they'll net and also use various plants to poison the water. We've even found where they've poisoned water holes with cotton poisoning, and that also will kill anything that drinks there, birds, animals or whatever. Those are the three main methods that are used here. The difference in North Cameroon here, we're not protecting animals that are common anywhere else in the world. These are not Cape buffalo that are farmed in South Africa in pens and so on. The giant eland now, it only occurs in a couple of countries. Cameroon is the only one where they're huntable because the others are in conflict zones. A poacher comes in and shoots a giant eland, cuts up the meat, racks it. With what he'll get from that eland, probably less than $200 worth of sales from that meat. You have a paying client come in on a safari, you're looking at $40,000, $50,000 for that animal. And it's not just the shooting of the animal, the jobs that are created. I mean, we're probably the biggest employers in this region. Our company employs over 100 people to work in the camps, anti-poaching, etc. What we've noticed here over the last few years, there were quite a few, what we would say, small-time operators in Cameroon that had one concession. And with the poaching and the cattle problems, these concession owners could no longer afford to do the anti-poaching that was required to make those concessions viable. So there's a number of hunting blocks here now that are totally abandoned, solely because financially they cannot afford to do the anti-poaching, and it got to a point where they could actually not conduct safaris there successfully, so they've pulled out. So we're now getting situations where our neighbors there's no protection there. We basically border onto a concession that has no control at all, and now we're having more and more poaching problems because of that. The hunting companies in Cameroon here are the last line of defense for these animals. You could go right now, go into a hunting area, see what game they have, go into a hunting area where the operator has pulled out because of lack of funds to do the correct anti-poaching. Those areas are completely annihilated. There's nothing there. You will not see an animal full of poachers, cattle, domestic livestock. It's finished. The only protection these animals have outside of the parks are the hunting companies that are trying their best to do the anti-poaching, but it's got to a point now where they just can't afford to do what is required. We're not at a point yet where it's not salvageable. We can still, make a plan and get the numbers of these animals back up. The use of a microlight or a savannah aircraft would be a great help. Very easy to spot cattle from the air. There's vast areas here without roads. It would take days, if not weeks sometimes, to locate camps. With a small aircraft like that, in an hour, you would have covered the whole concession. Then you could radio back to your ground guys and they can go in on foot with a GPS coordinate, and that would be a huge help. Because of the strict rules in Cameroon, when there's any equipment that is military-like or involves an aircraft or helicopter, the government is very sticky. So the best way to approach that is to work in conjunction with our neighbors who are the national park. They would be able to import those kind of goods, and then we could have an arrangement with them that maybe the aircraft actually would be based in the park where we as a company have opened an airstrip there, and the plane could fly from there. The same goes for anything like a drone. As long as that drone came in under the wing of the wildlife department, we would be able to use it, but we wouldn't be the ones in the forefront bringing that equipment in. One of the solutions may be for an organization like Africa Parks that have done incredible work in various African countries, would be to come in here and take over a number of these hunting blocks that are in the vicinity of the national parks, run those areas, do all the anti-poaching, be in charge of the security, but allow the hunting operators to continue in those areas so that they continue to pay the concession fees to the government. They continue employing the people from the local communities. That could be the answer so that everyone is happy. If we don't change things drastically, we will end up losing all of these areas. The pressure is too much. Around 2011 to 2012, that's when we had the caravans of Sudanese come in. And in 3 seasons they annihilated literally the entire population of elephant here. We went from seeing elephant every day, 3 years later not even to see a track. That's how quick it happened. I came across their tracks on several occasions, and obviously these guys were fully armed on camels, horses, big gangs of them, 25, 30 of them. So whenever we came across fresh tracks, we would exit the area, because for sure we would have had a confrontation. The Sudanese actually would cross with their camels and horses through Chad from Sudan all the way across, and then entered Cameroon on its eastern boundary. So our most affected area was Jibao, which borders on the western side of Bubanjida National Park, and on its eastern boundary is Chad. And they actually set up base there, and they just annihilated the elephants. Everything, cows, calves, bulls. There was one spot there where there were over 80 elephants shot in about a 200 meter square spot, and they just hacked out the ivory and moved on. No meat was touched, or it was just ivory, no matter how big or how small. So with the poaching having increased now, before we typically have one PH that was responsible for one concession, and he would sort of run that camp, oversee the anti-poaching, the opening of the area, etc. But the volume of poaching has got to a point now where it's too much, and although we're doing the very best with what we've got, it's not enough. The poaching is outweighing our anti-poaching success by a large margin. And there's nowhere else where these giant eland occur. CAR is probably the only other place where there's some. But that's a conflict zone, and who knows what's going to happen there. What we actually need now is to have a minimum of one guy in charge of anti-poaching per 2 areas, and his sole job would be just to supervise all the patrolling, the movement of the military and the scouts from area to area. They would need a vehicle for this, obviously. Right now we're trying to operate on motorcycles. We've got 1 vehicle between the 4 areas. So we would need 2 guys between the 4 areas that hopefully would have a background in anti-poaching or wildlife, that would understand how to manage that. Maybe if we could all get together and somehow increase the security all the way around, rather than just having little pockets of operators that are protected, areas that are protected, the more we can protect, the better. All these hunting areas are a buffer zone around the park. Even going back now to the early 2000s, back then there were way more animals in the hunting blocks than there were in the park, because there was very little anti-poaching or any activity in the national park. So it was full of cattle and poachers. We had way more game here. Now there's more protection in the park and the numbers are coming up there, but there's more poaching in the surrounding areas. So if we could have a system whereby the park had a good anti-poaching system there, they could protect their terrain and then spill over into the hunting blocks around it, it would create a much bigger wildlife zone. I think another alternative could possibly be to fence in a number of the hunting blocks that adjoin the park. So you'd basically fence from the southern side around onto the park, only leaving. In fact, you wouldn't even have to leave the boundary open between the park and Chad, but it would have to be electrified fence, and that would need to be patrolled daily, which is costly. I mean, I know those electric game fences are running around $5,000 a kilometre, so it's not cheap at all. That way, at least you could safeguard well over a million acres. Yeah, that would stop all the cattle coming through and people you don't need coming through. But currently what we have in place is not going to do that. So hopefully if we can get some guys to come in and help us here, because we need help here. This is one of the last places in Africa where these eland exist, and it would be a shame for them to disappear, because it's happening around us. We're seeing hunting areas being abandoned, poached out, taken over by cattle herders. Yeah, it's quite scary as to what's happening.